The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast ocean of alien life. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the floating seats that surrounded the central speaking platform. Some had scales that shimmered like metal. Others had tentacles that moved like water, and many had forms that human eyes could barely understand. The air buzzed with electronic translators working overtime to make sense of hundreds of different languages. Jake Morrison stood at the human podium, his hands steady despite what he knew was coming. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Council for 15 years. His gray hair and lined face showed the weight of those years, but his blue eyes remained sharp and alert. Behind him sat the rest of the human delegation. Dr. Lisa Campbell adjusted her glasses nervously. General Pete Williams sat straight in his military uniform, watching everything with careful eyes. The Supreme Counselor Vexthara rose from her throne at the center of the hall. She was 12 feet tall and made of what looked like living crystal. Light passed through her body in strange patterns, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. The translation device made her words clear and cold. The Galactic Council has reached a decision regarding the human species, she announced. The hall fell silent. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed to quiet down. For 300 standard years, humans have been members of our alliance. They have contributed to our civilization in many ways. Jake felt his heart beating faster, but his face remained calm. He had expected this day for a long time. However, Vexthara continued, the Council has observed disturbing patterns in human behavior. Your species expands too quickly. You question our established methods. You refuse to follow protocols that have maintained galactic peace for thousands of years. Most concerning of all, you promote dangerous ideas about individual thinking over collective harmony. Whispers and strange sounds rippled through the alien audience. Some species had tentacles that glowed with approval. Others made clicking sounds that the translators turned into words of agreement. The Council has voted, Vexthara said. Humanity has 30 galactic standard days to remove all presence from Council territory. All diplomatic relations will end. All trade agreements will be cancelled. All humans must leave Council space and never return. Jake had prepared for this moment, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the stomach. 3 centuries of cooperation, of shared discoveries of humans and aliens working together to solve problems across the galaxy. All of it ending because they were afraid of how humans thought and acted. Dr. Campbell leaned forward and whispered, Jake, the Kepler situation, they're going to regret this. She was right. Just 5 years ago, humanity had saved the Kepler system from total destruction. The star had been ready to explode, which would have killed 17 billion aliens on nearby planets. The Council's best scientists had tried everything according to their ancient methods. Nothing worked. Then human engineers had arrived and solved the problem in 6 days using completely new ideas that nobody had ever tried before. The alien species had been grateful then. They had praised human creativity and innovation. But gratitude had turned to fear when they realized that humans could think of solutions that their own scientists could never imagine. General Williams kept his face blank, but Jake knew what he was thinking. The human military had helped defend Council worlds from pirates and invaders for decades. Human soldiers had died protecting alien colonies. Human ships had carried relief supplies to disaster zones across the galaxy. None of that mattered now. Jake stood up slowly. The hall became completely quiet. Thousands of alien eyes, sensors, and other organs focused on him. He looked around the vast space, seeing species he had worked with, argued with, and learned from over the years. Some looked uncomfortable with what was happening. Others seemed eager to see humans gone. Supreme Counselor, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. I want to thank the Council for the years of cooperation we have shared. Humanity has learned much from our time here. We have been honored to serve alongside so many different species in building a better galaxy. He paused, letting his words sink in. Some of the aliens shifted uncomfortably. They had expected anger, threats, or pleading. Jake's calm dignity seemed to surprise them. "We will comply with the Council's decision," he continued. "All humans will leave Council space within the time limit you have given us. We will not cause trouble or make demands. We came to the Council in peace, and we will leave in peace." Jake looked directly at Vextara. "We hope that the galaxy finds the harmony it seeks. Perhaps someday, when the Council is ready for diversity of thought and new ways of solving problems, our species can meet again as friends." The silence in the hall was complete. Even the translation devices seemed stunned into quiet. Jake gathered his papers and turned to leave. Dr. Campbell and General Williams followed him, along with the rest of the human delegation. As they walked toward the exit, Jake noticed something strange. Many of the aliens were not making the sounds of victory or approval he had expected. Instead, there was an uncomfortable quiet that felt almost like regret. Outside the great hall, Dr. Campbell finally spoke. "They have no idea what they're giving up," she said quietly. General Williams nodded. "The colony ships are already prepared. Our people have been ready for this possibility for years." Jake smiled for the first time that day. "Then let's go home and begin the next chapter of human history. We've learned what we needed to learn here." As their ship lifted off from the Council station, Jake looked back at the massive structure that had been humanity's gateway to galactic civilization. Soon, humans would be gone from Council space completely. The aliens would get their harmony and their established ways of doing things. Jake wondered how long it would take them to realize what they had lost. Captain Ben Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching the holographic display that showed 1,200 red dots scattered across the galaxy. Each dot represented a world where humans lived and worked. In 28 days, every single human would need to leave Council space. It was the largest peaceful evacuation in galactic history. "Status report," Ben called out to his crew. Lieutenant Sarah Jones looked up from her console. "Sir, we have contact with all colony coordinators. The evacuation is proceeding on schedule. No resistance from local authorities so far." Ben nodded. The human government had been planning for this day for decades. Secret colonies beyond Council space, hidden supply routes, and backup systems had all been prepared. When the Council finally made their decision, humanity was ready on the industrial world of Kepler 442b. Chief Engineer Amy Parker walked through the massive factory complex that humans had built over 50 years. The facility produced advanced computer processors that were used throughout the galaxy. Local alien workers watched nervously as human engineers began shutting down the machines. "Will the factory still work after you leave?" asked Zektar, a blue-skinned Zealothi foreman who had worked alongside humans for 20 years. Amy smiled and handed him a thick manual. "Everything you need to know is in here. We've written down every procedure, every maintenance schedule, and every troubleshooting guide. Your people can keep this place running better than when we arrived." Zektar looked confused. "But why?" "Your people are being forced to leave. You could just shut everything down and leave us with nothing." "That's not who we are," Amy replied. "You and your people have been our friends and co-workers. We're not going to punish you for what the Council decided." Amy's team spent their final weeks training Zealothi engineers on systems that humans had designed. They left behind detailed blueprints, spare parts, and even recorded video instructions for complex repairs. When they finally boarded their transport ship, the factory was running smoother than ever. Across the galaxy on Proxima Verde, Rick Stevens stood in fields of golden grain that stretched to the horizon. The crops were a hybrid that human scientists had developed specifically for this world's soil and climate. Before humans arrived, the planet could barely feed its population. Now it was one of the major food suppliers for the entire sector. The local Aquarian administrator, Fluxwing, approached Rick with what looked like worry. The Aquarians were water-based beings who lived in mobile suits filled with their home ocean. "Stevens, what will happen to our crops when your people leave?" Fluxwing's translator made his liquid voice sound concerned. Rick knelt down and scooped up a handful of the rich soil. "See this dirt? Your people have been farming it alongside us for 30 years. You know these crops as well as we do. The seeds are all yours now, along with all our research notes and planting schedules. But the council said humans were dangerous. That you think too differently. Rick stood up and brushed the soil off his hands. Different thinking is what made these crops possible. Your people will do fine. Trust yourselves. Rick's agricultural teams left behind more than just crops. They had developed new fertilizers, irrigation systems, and farming equipment specifically designed for aquarian physiology. Local farmers received training manuals, written in their own language and farming tools modified for their unique appendages. On the medical station orbiting Tau Ceti, Dr. Helen Foster worked around the clock to train alien medical staff. The station served as a major hospital for the entire system, treating dozens of different species with completely different biologies. The neural surgery technique we showed you last week, Helen explained to a group of crystalline doctors. Remember that the vibration frequency has to match the patient's natural resonance. Too high and you'll cause damage. Too low and the treatment won't work. One of the crystal beings flickered with what Helen had learned was their equivalent of nodding. Dr. Foster, your people have saved millions of lives across dozens of species. Why is the council sending you away? Helen sighed as she packed her medical equipment. Fear, mostly. We solve problems differently than other species. Some people see that as dangerous instead of helpful. Helen's medical team left behind complete databases of surgical procedures, treatment protocols, and research data that had taken humans centuries to develop. They trained local doctors not just in techniques but in the human approach to medicine, adapt, improvise, and never give up on a patient. Captain Rodriguez received daily reports from evacuation coordinators across council space. The pattern was the same everywhere. Humans were leaving behind working systems, trained local staff, and detailed instructions for everything they had built. Instead of destroying their work or taking it with them, they were giving it all away. Sir, Lieutenant Jones said, we're getting some unusual communications from council worlds. Local governments are asking their human residents to stay. Some are even offering to ignore the council's expulsion order. Ben wasn't surprised. The aliens who worked directly with humans understood their value. It was the distant council members who only saw reports and statistics that had voted for expulsion. What are our people saying? Ben asked. They're all choosing to leave, sir. They say they won't put their alien friends in a position where they have to choose between local needs and council law. As the evacuation continued, something unexpected began happening. Alien workers who had never paid much attention to their human colleagues started realizing how much humans actually did. The quick fixes that kept machines running, the creative solutions to supply problems, the way humans could look at a broken system and figure out a completely new way to make it work. On Kepler 442b, production efficiency dropped 15%. In the first week after Amy Parker's team left, even with all their manuals and training. On Proxima Verde, crop yields started declining when unexpected weather patterns required the kind of quick adaptation that Rick Stevens had made look easy. At the medical station, Dr. Foster's alien replacements found themselves overwhelmed by complex cases that she had handled routinely. The procedures were all documented, but humans had an instinct for knowing when to break the rules that couldn't be written down in any manual. Captain Rodriguez watched the final transport ships leaving council space. Humanity's peaceful exodus was complete. They had left behind working systems, trained staff, and detailed instructions. They had also left behind something less visible but more important, the human approach to problem solving that had quietly held much of galactic civilization together. Course set for the Orion Arm, sir, his navigator reported. Take us home, Ben said, knowing that home now meant something entirely different than it had a month ago. 6 months after the last human ship left council space, Counselor Thinnick of the Aquarian Union floated in his water-filled chamber, staring at the economic reports on his display screen. The numbers were getting worse every week, and he was starting to understand why trade routes that had moved goods efficiently for decades were now backed up with delays. Shipments that used to arrive on time were weeks late. The carefully planned schedules that kept the galactic economy running smoothly were falling apart. What Theonic had not realized was that human logistics experts had been quietly managing most of these systems for years. The vegan trade corridor is operating at 60% efficiency, his aide reported. The Zealothi Confederation is requesting emergency food shipments to 12 worlds. Their agricultural output has dropped by 30%. Theonic's tentacles writhed with frustration. How is that possible? The humans left all their farming equipment and training materials. Yes, counselor, but the equipment keeps breaking down. The local repair teams can fix simple problems, but when something unexpected happens, they don't know how to adapt. The humans used to modify the equipment on the spot to handle new situations. On Kepler 442b, Zektar stood in the main factory control room, surrounded by displays showing red warning lights. The computer processor facility was operating at half capacity, and he couldn't figure out why. Amy Parker's manuals were excellent, but they couldn't cover every possible problem. The quantum alignment chamber is showing errors again, his assistant reported. That's the third time this month. Zektar pulled up the troubleshooting guide that Amy had left behind. The instructions were clear. Check the power flow, verify the magnetic field strength, and recalibrate the quantum matrix. He had done all of that, but the problem kept coming back. What the manual couldn't tell him was that Amy used to listen to the subtle changes in the machine's humming sound. She would adjust the settings based on tiny variations that weren't covered in any official procedure. The humans had called it mechanical intuition, but to Zektar, it might as well have been magic. The real crisis began when the Kepler star system started showing signs of instability again. The same star that humans had saved 5 years ago was beginning to fluctuate in ways that threatened the 17 worlds in its orbit. Dr. Kexthal, the crystalline scientist now in charge of the Kepler stabilization project, stood before a massive display showing the star's energy patterns. The stabilization equipment that humans had installed was slowly failing, and he didn't understand why. The harmonic resonance is shifting, his assistant reported. The stabilization field is losing coherence. Dr. Kexthal consulted the technical manuals that the human team had left behind. Everything seemed to be operating within normal parameters, but the system was still degrading. The manuals explained what each component did, but they didn't explain the subtle interactions between components that the humans had understood instinctively. Contact the Council, Dr. Kexthal ordered. We need to request emergency assistance. But assistance from where? The humans were gone, and no other species had their unique combination of creativity and technical skill. The crystalline beings were excellent at following established procedures, but they struggled with the kind of innovative thinking that had solved the Kepler crisis in the first place. Meanwhile, beyond Council space, humanity was thriving in ways that amazed even themselves. Captain Rodriguez, now exploring the far reaches of the Orion Arm, sent regular reports back to Earth about new discoveries and successful colonies. We've made contact with 3 new species this month, he reported to the Terran Federation Council. The luminous ones from the Andromeda sector, the Hive Collective from the Outer Rim, and the peaceful wanderers from the void between galaxies. All of them are interested in trade and cultural exchange. Without the restrictions of council bureaucracy, human scientists and engineers were developing new technologies at an incredible pace. Dr. Foster, now running a medical research facility on New Geneva, had made breakthrough discoveries in treating diseases that affected multiple species. Her work was already saving lives on human colonies and the independent worlds that had chosen to work with humanity. The freedom to experiment without having to get approval from 14 different council committees is amazing, she reported to her colleagues on Earth. We've developed new treatments in 6 months that would have taken years to get approved under the old system. Back in council space, the problems continued to mount. The Mechanoid Collective, known for their logical approach to problem solving, found themselves struggling with supply chain disruptions that defied their mathematical models. The ethereal communion, masters of spiritual harmony, discovered that meditation couldn't fix broken transportation networks. Supreme Counselor Vexthara called an emergency session to address the growing crisis. The Great Hall was filled with worried representatives from hundreds of worlds, all facing similar problems. The post-human economic data is troubling, she announced. Productivity is down across 47 sectors. We are experiencing the longest period without major technological innovation in 2 centuries. Several ongoing crises that were previously managed by human intervention teams are now spiraling out of control. Counselor Thenek raised his water-filled appendage to speak. Supreme Counselor, I believe we made an error in our assessment of human contributions to our civilization. They were not just members of our alliance. They were essential to its functioning. A wave of uncomfortable sounds rippled through the assembly. No one wanted to admit that they had made a mistake, especially not one this serious. The humans solve problems in ways that we cannot replicate, Fiona continued. They didn't just follow our established procedures. They created new procedures when the old ones didn't work. That ability to adapt and innovate was holding our civilization together in ways we never realized. The emergency session continued for days, but no solutions emerged. The Council could pass new laws, form new committees, and create new procedures, but they couldn't create the kind of flexible, innovative thinking that had made humanity so valuable. As reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy, one thing became clear: the humans hadn't just been useful members of the Council. They had been the glue that held galactic civilization together, and now that glue was gone. 2 years after humanity left Council space, the galaxy was falling apart. Supreme Counselor Vexthara stood in her private chamber, reading reports that got worse every day. The vegan trade collapse had triggered an economic crisis that affected over 300 worlds. Without human logistics experts to manage the complex trade networks, entire sectors were running short of essential supplies. The worst crisis was the Andromedan plague. The deadly virus had appeared on the outer rim worlds and was spreading faster than anyone had expected. In the past, human medical teams would have responded within days, setting up quarantine zones and developing treatments. Now, the Council's medical response teams were overwhelmed and confused. The plague has reached 47 worlds, her aide reported. Local medical authorities are requesting immediate assistance, but our response teams don't know how to contain it. The virus keeps changing, and our standard treatments aren't working. Vexthara's crystalline form flickered with what her species showed as deep worry. She remembered Dr. Helen Foster's medical teams. They had handled similar outbreaks by adapting their treatments as the virus changed. They never followed just one approach. They tried multiple solutions at once and changed their methods whenever something wasn't working. The Council's medical teams, trained in established procedures, kept trying the same treatments even when they failed. They waited for official approval before trying new approaches. By the time they got permission to change their methods, the plague had spread to more worlds, but the most dangerous crisis was happening at the galaxy's core. The ancient AI defense network that protected civilized space from threats beyond the galaxy was slowly failing. The massive computer system had been built by a long-dead species millions of years ago, and only human technicians had figured out how to maintain it properly. Emergency Counselor Ryan Harper, one of the few humans who had stayed behind after the Exodus, stood in the control center of the defense network. He had been born on a Council world to human parents and had chosen to remain when his people left. Now he was the only person in Council space who understood how the ancient systems worked. The network is operating at 60% capacity, he reported to the Council Emergency Committee. 3 of the main processing cores have gone offline, and I can't bring them back up alone. The human maintenance teams used to work in groups of 20 or 30 people. I'm just one person. The AI network defended against the void swarms, mysterious entities from the space between galaxies that periodically tried to invade and consume entire star systems. Without the network functioning at full capacity, the galaxy was vulnerable to attack. Ryan tried to explain to the alien technicians how the system worked, but they couldn't understand the human approach to maintaining it. The original builders had designed the AI to be logical and predictable. But over millions of years, the system had developed quirks and unexpected behaviors. Human technicians had learned to work with these quirks instead of fighting them. The AI doesn't just process data, Ryan explained to a group of mechanoid engineers. It has something like personality traits. You have to treat it almost like a living being. When it's having problems, you don't just run diagnostics. You have to figure out what's bothering it and help it solve its own problems. The mechanoids looked at him with their optical sensors, clearly confused. Their logical minds couldn't understand how a computer system could have emotions or personality. They kept trying to fix the AI with standard repair procedures, which only made the problems worse. Meanwhile, the species that had voted to expel humanity were discovering what they had lost. The proud Zelethi Confederation was facing famine. On 12 worlds, their agricultural systems, designed with human help, were failing without human maintenance. The crops were dying and millions of Zelethi were going hungry. Zector, now promoted to Chief Administrator of Kepler 442b, sent desperate messages to the Terran Federation colonies, begging for help. The factory complex was operating at 30% capacity. Half the equipment had broken down, and the repair manuals that Amy Parker had left behind weren't enough to fix the complex problems that kept arising. "We need your people back," he transmitted to anyone who would listen. "We were wrong about humans being dangerous. You weren't dangerous to us. You were essential to us." The efficient mechanoid collective discovered that their logical systems couldn't handle the chaos of real-world problems. When their main computer network suffered a cascading failure, they tried to fix it using mathematical models and logical procedures. The system kept crashing because they couldn't adapt to unexpected variables the way human technicians could. The mystical, ethereal communion found that their spiritual practices couldn't solve supply shortages. Their meditation techniques were perfect for maintaining inner peace, but they couldn't figure out why shipments of essential materials weren't arriving on schedule. The complex logistics networks that humans had managed were beyond their understanding. Dr. Foster, now running a medical research facility in the Orion Arm, received daily communications from her former colleagues in council space, alien doctors, who had worked with her for years, were begging for help with the spreading plague. "Helen, we need you," transmitted Dr. Flexara from the Tau Ceti medical station. "The plague has reached our system, and we can't stop it. Our treatments aren't working. We're following all the procedures you taught us, but the virus keeps changing faster than we can adapt." Dr. Foster wanted to help, but she was no longer allowed in council space. The same laws that had expelled humanity prevented her from returning, even to help with a medical emergency that was killing millions. Amy Parker received similar messages from industrial worlds across the former human territories. Equipment was breaking down, production was falling, and the alien workers she had trained were struggling with problems that seemed impossible to solve without human creativity and adaptability. Rick Stevens got requests from agricultural worlds that were facing crop failures and food shortages. The farming techniques he had taught were failing because local conditions kept changing in ways that required constant adaptation. Supreme Counselor Vexthara finally faced the truth that she had been avoiding for 2 years. In her private chambers, she admitted to her closest advisors what everyone already knew, but no one wanted to say. "We made a mistake," she said quietly. "Humanity wasn't a threat to our civilization. They were what kept our civilization working. Without them, we're failing." 3 years after humanity left council space, President Claire Mitchell sat in her office on New Terra, reading the most unusual document in galactic history. The message had arrived through emergency counselor Ryan Harper, and it was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever sent to any species. "We were wrong," the document began. "The Galactic Council formally apologizes to humanity for our decision to expel your species from council space. We now understand that your people were not a threat to galactic harmony. You were essential to maintaining it." Claire read through the rest of the message carefully. It wasn't just an apology. It was a complete admission of failure. The Council acknowledged that humanity's unique approach to problem-solving had been holding galactic civilization together in ways they had never understood. Without humans, the galaxy was collapsing. The document included detailed reports of the crises affecting Council space. The Andromedan plague had now killed over 50 million beings. The AI defense network was operating at only 40% capacity. The economic collapse had left hundreds of worlds short of basic supplies. Most seriously, the void swarms had been detected at the galaxy's edge, and the weakened defense systems might not be able to stop them. "They're not demanding our return," Claire noted to her advisors. "They're asking for it. They're actually begging." General Pete Williams, now head of the Terran Federation Defense Force, shook his head in amazement. 3 years ago, they called us dangerous and disruptive. Now they're admitting they can't survive without us. Dr. Lisa Campbell, now director of the Federation Science Council, had been studying the reports from Council space. "The pattern is clear," she said. "Every crisis they're facing is something that humans used to handle routinely. They didn't just lose our technology when we left, they lost our way of thinking." Claire knew that humanity held all the cards now, but she also knew that millions of innocent aliens were suffering because of the Council's mistake. The question was what terms to set for humanity's return. The negotiations took 6 months. Humanity's demands were fair but firm. Full restoration of membership rights with expanded territory for human colonies. Guaranteed representation in Council leadership positions. Most importantly, a complete restructuring of Council governance to encourage innovation and diversity of thought instead of conformity to established patterns. "We won't return to a system that will just expel us again in a few hundred years," Claire told the Council negotiators. "The galaxy needs to accept that different ways of thinking are valuable, not dangerous." Admiral Ben Rodriguez, now commanding the largest fleet in human history, led the first ships back into Council space. His mission was to restore the AI defense network before the void swarms could attack. Ryan Harper met him at the network's control center, exhausted from 3 years of trying to maintain the ancient systems alone. "Ben, thank goodness you're here," Ryan said as they embraced. "The network is barely holding together. I've been working 20-hour days just to keep the basic functions running." Ben brought a team of 30 human technicians who immediately went to work on the failing systems. Within hours, they had identified problems that Ryan couldn't handle alone. The AI network wasn't just malfunctioning. It was sick, like a living being that had been neglected for too long. "The AI is depressed," explained Chief Technician Katie Walsh as she worked on one of the main processing cores. "I know that sounds crazy, but these old systems develop personality traits over millions of years. It's been lonely and confused, without proper maintenance. We need to heal its emotional state as well as fix its technical problems." The alien technicians watching her work looked confused, but they couldn't argue with the results. Under Katie's care, the processing core came back online and began functioning better than it had in years. Dr. Foster returned to Council space, leading a massive medical mission to fight the Andromedan plague. Her team brought new treatment methods developed during humanity's exile, along with the flexible thinking that had always made human medicine so effective. "The plague keeps changing because it's trying to survive," she explained to the alien medical teams. "We need to change faster than it does. Don't just treat the symptoms. Predict what the virus will do next and be ready for it." Working with doctors from dozens of species, Dr. Foster's team developed new treatments that adapted in real time to the virus's mutations. Within 6 months, the plague was contained and eventually eliminated. Amy Parker returned to Cupola 442B to find Zektar waiting for her with tears in his eyes. The factory was barely functional, and the local workers had been struggling for 3 years to keep it running. "Amy, we saved every part you told us to save," Zektar said. "We followed every procedure in your manuals. But we couldn't think like humans. We couldn't adapt when new problems came up." Amy smiled and patted his shoulder. "That's okay, my friend. Adaptation is something you can learn. Let me show you how to think like a human engineer." The rebuilding process took 5 years, but the galaxy that emerged was stronger than before. The Council's new charter protected diversity of thought and encouraged species to contribute their unique perspectives instead of conforming to standard procedures. Dr. Campbell established the Interspecies Innovation Institute, where humans worked alongside aliens to develop new approaches to galactic challenges. The Institute's first project was creating response protocols that could be adapted by any species, preventing the kind of dependency that had led to the galaxy's near collapse. Rick Stevens returned to agricultural worlds across the galaxy, but this time he brought teams of both human and alien farmers. Together, they developed farming techniques that combined human adaptability with alien knowledge of local conditions. The Void Swarm invasion, when it finally came, was defeated by the restored defense network working at full capacity. The AI, healthy and properly maintained, coordinated defenses that protected the entire galaxy. In the end, the Council learned what humanity had always known. Strength came not from everyone thinking the same way, but from different species working together and learning from each other. The galaxy's payment for humanity's return wasn't measured in credits or territory, but in humility, respect, and the wisdom that some lessons can only be learned through loss. Years later, when new species applied to join the Council, they were welcome not for how well they fit existing patterns, but for what new perspectives they could bring. The age of conformity was over. The age of collaboration had begun,